I went from Millionaire to store clerk and got banned from my family. Then my son's Christmas gift made everyone apologize. I, 45M, never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after what happened this Christmas, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It's a long one, but I hope it might help someone else going through similar times. 2 years ago, I lost everything. My construction business of 15 years went under after 3 major clients defaulted on their payments and several projects got delayed due to supply chain issues. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing about bankruptcy that most people don't understand. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, but you're the conductor and no matter how hard you pull the brakes, you can't stop it. The first sign of trouble came when one of our biggest clients, a developer working on a luxury apartment complex, started delaying payments. At first, it was just a week here, 2 weeks there. I had known the guy for years, trusted him. He kept promising the money was coming. I kept paying my workers because that's what you do. You take care of your people. By the time I realized he was using our work to secure funding for other projects, we were already in deep. Then the supply chain issues hit. Lumber prices tripled. Steel became nearly impossible to source. Projects that should have taken 3 months stretched to 8. Every delay meant more overhead, more wages to pay, more loans to cover the gaps. I tried everything to keep it afloat, took out loans, sold my car, even mortgaged our house. I stopped taking a salary, used our savings, maxed out credit cards. Looking back, I was like a guy trying to plug holes in a sinking ship with his fingers. The more holes I plugged, the more that appeared. The day I finally filed for bankruptcy was surreal. The lawyer's office was this sterile place that smelled like coffee and paper. I remember signing my name over and over, each signature feeling like I was erasing 15 years of my life. The worst part was calling my employees, 23 people who had trusted me with their livelihoods. Some of them had been with me since I started with just a pickup truck and a toolbox. Telling them it was over was harder than telling my own family. The fallout was brutal. My wife stuck around for exactly 3 months and 12 days. Not that I was counting. She tried. I'll give her that. But watching your husband move from being a successful business owner to being unable to buy groceries does something to a marriage. The fight started small, about cutting back on expenses, but they grew into something uglier. The final straw was when she found out I had used our youngest college fund to try to save the business. She left the next day, taking our 14-year-old with her. My older son, 17 at the time, surprised everyone by choosing to stay with me. I tried to convince him to go with his mom. She had already found a nice place, was staying with her sister in a good school district, but he just looked at me with this stubborn expression I'd seen in the mirror my whole life and said, "Dad, I'm not leaving you alone." Those words kept me going through some pretty dark nights. We moved from our 4-bedroom house in the suburbs to a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The kind of place where the heating works when it feels like it, and the neighbors' arguments become part of your daily soundtrack. I got a job at Harper's Hardware, making barely enough to cover rent and utilities. The irony wasn't lost on me. From owning a construction company to stocking shelves with tools I used to buy in bulk. The first time a former client came in and did a double take at seeing me in the orange apron, I wanted to melt into the floor. But you swallow your pride pretty quick when there are bills to pay. The social isolation was the hardest part. My siblings, who I'd helped countless times over the years, paid for my sister's wedding when her fiancé lost his job, helped my brother with the down payment on his house, stopped inviting us to family gatherings. At first, they made excuses. "Oh, we're keeping it small this year," or "We thought you might be too busy." Eventually, they stopped making excuses altogether. My parents, though they tried to hide it, were clearly embarrassed by my situation. They'd always bragged about their successful businessman's son at their country club. Now they had to explain to their friends why I was working retail at 45. My mom would still call, but the conversations were different. She stopped asking about work or future plans, sticking to safe topics like the weather or her garden. My dad, who had loaned me money during the bankruptcy, could barely look me in the eye. Last Christmas was rock bottom. We couldn't afford a tree. Dinner was mac and cheese from a box, and not even the good kind. My son didn't complain, but I caught him looking at photos on his phone of his cousin's Christmas celebrations that we weren't invited to. They had shared the pictures in the family group chat, the one I was still in, but where my messages were usually met with silence. The photos showed perfectly decorated trees, mountains of presents, smiling faces around laden dinner tables. I went to the bathroom and cried for the first time since the bankruptcy. Not for myself, but for what I had taken from my son. The following months were a blur of work, bills, and trying to rebuild something resembling a life. I started taking online courses at night, studying for my project management certification. My son finished high school with honors, and got accepted to the local community college. He insisted on working part-time at a diner to help with expenses, despite my protests. My ex-wife had moved across the country with our youngest, and though we had video calls, I could see my younger son drifting away, becoming a stranger who shared my last name. This year, I was dreading the holidays even more. The weight of another Christmas in our shabby apartment, another year of being the family failure, felt crushing. But then something changed. 2 weeks before Christmas, my son came home from his diner shift clutching a small envelope. His hands were shaking slightly as he handed it to me, and he had this expression I couldn't quite read. Inside was $843 in cash and a handwritten note that I've read so many times since that the paper is starting to wear at the creases. Dad, I've been saving my tips for 6 months. I know it's not much, but maybe we can have a real Christmas this year? You've never given up, even when everyone else did. That means more than any amount of money. You taught me that a man's worth isn't in his wallet, but in how he handles life when everything goes wrong. I'm proud to be your son. I broke down right there in our tiny kitchen, with its peeling linoleum and flickering fluorescent light. My son, who I thought was ashamed of me, who I worried would resent me for the rest of his life, had been watching and learning something completely different from our struggles. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time since starting there. My son and I spent the day getting ready for Christmas. We found a small tree at the local lot, a bit crooked, but perfect for our corner of the living room. We bought ingredients for a proper Christmas dinner, nothing fancy but real food. I insisted on using some of the money to buy him a new winter coat he desperately needed. His old one was held together with safety pins and hope. While we were decorating the tree with the few ornaments we'd managed to keep from our old life, my son told me something that stopped me in my tracks. He said that watching me these past 2 years, going to work every day without complaining, trying to better myself with night classes, never giving up, had taught him more about being a man than all our comfortable years ever did. The story somehow made its way through our family. My sister called first, crying and apologizing. She admitted she had avoided me partly out of guilt. She had never paid me back for her wedding, and seeing me struggle while knowing that made her ashamed. Then my brother showed up at the hardware store, looking as uncomfortable as I'd ever seen him. He couldn't meet my eyes as he told me he'd been wrong, that family should stick together no matter what. My parents showed up unannounced at our apartment on Christmas Eve. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, taking in our modest decorations and the smell of cooking from our small kitchen. My mom burst into tears when she saw the tree, saying something about how it reminded her of their first Christmas when they were just starting out. My dad, who had barely spoken 10 words to me in the past year, hugged me for the first time since I was a kid. Even some old friends reached out. My former foreman, who now runs his own successful company, offered me a project manager position starting in the new year. He said he remembered how I gave him a chance when no one else would, back when he was fresh out of rehab and couldn't get hired anywhere. I'm still working at the hardware store, at least for now. We're still living in the small apartment, though we've started looking for a slightly better place closer to my son's college. My credit is slowly improving, and I'm halfway through my certification course. But the biggest change isn't in our circumstances, it's in how we see ourselves and each other. My son taught me that real family isn't about celebrating your successes, it's about standing by you when you've lost everything. That sometimes the people you think you've disappointed the most are the ones who see your true strength. And that maybe, just maybe, hitting rock bottom can teach you what solid ground really feels like. Edit. Thank you all for the overwhelming response and the awards. To those asking, yes, I'm slowly rebuilding my credit and working on getting some of my contractor certifications renewed. My son started his second semester at community college, and I couldn't be prouder. We're taking it one day at a time. Edit 2. For those asking about my youngest, we video chat twice a week now, and they're coming to visit this summer. My ex-wife and I are on better terms too. Sometimes it takes hitting bottom to start rebuilding everything, including relationships. Edit 3. To the other business owners messaging me about similar struggles, yes, I'm happy to share what I learned the hard way. No one tells you how lonely it is at the bottom. Maybe we can help each other climb back up. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.